back for Old Testament studies. It's Easter evening as we video here at the church. As we continue through the story of Exodus, we made it to chapter 2. Last week, remember, kind of had the groundwork laid that the Egyptians were getting concerned that there was going to be way too many of them Israelites down there. And said, we're working them hard, and if some enemy comes, they're liable to team up with them and we'll be in trouble. So they're going to try to thin them out through population control. And Pharaoh made a law that get rid of all the males. They could keep the females, but get rid of all the males. But we found out here, well, this brings us to the story of Moses, chapter 2. We're going to see him born here, and in one chapter, he's going to be born, grow up, be 40-some-odd years of age, and have a baby. So there went a man of the house of Levi, chapter 2, Exodus, verse 1. Moses was from the tribe of Levi. This is his daddy here. They're talking about a man of the house of Levi, and took to wife a daughter of Levi. So Moses' father and mother were both of the tribe of Levi. We find out their names later, but right now that's all we need to know is Moses' mom and daddy. And the woman conceived, and she bare a son. And when she saw him that he was a goodly child, I think that just means he's a healthy, bouncy baby boy, she hid him for 3 months. Now, the law said she was supposed to go feed him to the crocodiles in the Nile, but she wasn't going to do that. These Hebrew midwives, they weren't going to do it either. They had their story, but, God's people just ain't going to participate in that ungodly plan, because there comes a time when we have to obey God and not men, even though that was the law of the land. But she hid him for 3 months, but verse 3 says she couldn't hide him any longer. When she could not longer hide him, you know what that means? That means Moses, like a lot of baby boys, by the time he reached 3 months old, had a really healthy set of lungs, and she knew they was going to get caught. So she couldn't no longer hide him. She took for him an ark of bulrushes. She made a little boat out of the bulrushes on the side of the river there. And she daubed them with slime and pitch. She's waterproofing it, so it'll make a little boat that'll float. And she, like a picnic basket, if you would, she waterproofed it. And she put the child therein. Here's this little baby. And she laid it in the flags by the river's brink. She went down to the cattails and placed him in the river, watched him float off, had a little something over him, I guess. And the daughter of Pharaoh, verse 5, she came down to wash herself at the river. That was probably, now you can look at this and say, well, is all this God's providence? Well, I know God was involved, but this is more of a plan than just providence, I think. They knew what time of day and when Pharaoh's daughter, maybe every day, came down with her maidens at this particular pool in the Nile, and that's where she took her bath. So they're planning this out upstream, Moses' mother and sister, and they're going to place him where he'll float down just as them women are down there taking a bath. So there's some planning in this too. God's involved, but there's good, careful planning. So the daughter of Pharaoh came down to wash herself at the river, and her maidens walked along by the riverside. And when she, Pharaoh's daughter, saw the ark, here it comes floating among the flags, she sent her maid to fetch it. Go see what that is. And when she had opened it, she saw the child. She uncovered to see what was inside, and there's a little baby staring back at her. And just that time, the little baby started crying. What happens when a little baby cries? Women's hearts, and it just melts, So I've heard it preached this way before, and it's kind of cute, and it's probably right. Said when she pulled that back, said an angel of the Lord reached in there and pinched that little baby, made him cry, and her heart just melted. So the daughter of Pharaoh came to wash herself. She opened it. She saw the child, and behold, the baby wept. And she had compassion on him and said, "This is one of the Hebrews' children." Then said his sister, now see, Moses' sister, I guess this is Miriam, who we meet later on. She's older than Moses and Aaron, I guess. So said his sister to Pharaoh's daughter. She went running down there when all this excitement's been going on too, right? And so she says to Pharaoh's daughter, "Should I go and call you a nurse of the Hebrew women, that she may nurse the child for thee?" Well, this is good planning. I mean, this is just smart. God, they did everything they could do, and God's blessing it, right? And Moses' sister said, "I know a woman that can nurse him for you. Should I go get her?" Now, we know who that is. It's going to be his own mama, right? So Pharaoh's daughter said to her, "Go," and the maid went and called the child's mother. Now, talk about a beautiful thing coming into place here. Not only have they saved his life from feeding him to the crocodiles, they've got it worked out now where his own mama is going to get paid to raise him. That's a good plan, ain't it? So Pharaoh's daughter said, take this child away and nurse it for me. She's talking to Moses' real mother, but she don't know that. And I'll give you your wage. I'll pay you. And the woman took the child and she nursed him. And the child grew, and she brought him to Pharaoh's daughter when he got too old to nurse, and he became her son, which Pharaoh's daughter claimed him from the beginning, right? But everybody else, Miriam and Moses' mother, they knew who he really was, but they let Pharaoh's daughter raise him. He's been raised in Pharaoh's very house here, which means at this point, Moses is really in line for the throne someday. But now Pharaoh has a firstborn later on, but this time he looks like he's Pharaoh's grandson, and if he didn't have any other children, then at this point Moses would have been in line to be Pharaoh someday. So Pharaoh's daughter, and he became her son, and she called his name Moses, which, by the way, Moses didn't get a Hebrew name. He might have got one by his mama later. We don't know what, or earlier, but we don't know what it was. But Pharaoh's daughter gave him the name we know, Moses. And it's an Egyptian name. And it means one who was drawn from the water. She said, because I drew him out of the water. And it came to pass, verse 11, in those days when Moses was grown, so in these 10 verses we went up to now, Moses is grown. And actually he's grown. He's 40 years old here. We find out later that at this point he's 40 years old. He's been thought to be Pharaoh's grandson, raised as an adopted orphan for that long now, 40 years. It came to pass in those days when Moses was grown, he went out to his brethren, probably riding one of Pharaoh's chariots, see what's going on out there, and he looked on their burdens. He's watching them work. And he spied an Egyptian smiting a Hebrew. So here's an Egyptian mistreating one of those Hebrews, and Moses knew that was really his people, one of his brethren. And Moses looked this way, and he looked that way, and when he saw there was no man watching him, he slew the Egyptian and hid him in the sand. He killed him and buried him out there in the sand. He thought he was helping out and doing a good thing, but he's murdered a man out here, ain't he? So when he went out the second day, Moses says, behold, 2 men of the Hebrews strove together. 2 Hebrews are fighting now. And he said to him that did the wrong, wherefore smitest thou thy fellow? And that guy says, well, who made you a prince and a judge over us? Intendest thou to kill me as thou killed the Egyptian? And Moses knew that, boy, it was the talk of the place. Everybody knew he had killed that Egyptian and buried him in the sand. And Moses feared and said, surely this thing is known. Now when Pharaoh heard this thing, he sought to slay Moses. He was going to kill Moses himself. He's a murderer. But Moses fled from the face of Pharaoh and dwelt in the land of Midian, and he sat down by a well. Now, we find out here comes the second stage of Moses' life. Moses' life is divided into 3 40s. He spends 40 years being raised in Pharaoh's home with the best university education in the world that day. He's trained in all the knowledge and wisdom of the Egyptians, and they were the ones that had it going on back in that day. But he still wasn't ready to be leader of God's people. Now God's going to give him 40 years of life experience to know what it's like to live as a common man out here as a sheep herder. So he runs off to the backside of the wilderness to a place called Midian over there, and that's where he's going to hide out, and he's going to learn a lot there in the next 40 years. At the age of 80 is when he goes back and he leads God's people toward the promised land. So he runs to Midian. He's just a murderer on the run at this point. He sat down by a well. Verse 16 now says, the priest of Midian had 7 daughters. This is a pagan priest living out there. His name's Jethro or Ruel. And they came and drew water, the daughters did. He's got 7 girls. He filled the troughs to water their father's flock. And the shepherds, they came and drove them away. They run them 7 girls off, said, we're going to water our sheep first. But Moses stood up and helped them, and he watered their flock. So the girls go home to daddy, and when they come home to Jethro or Ruel, they say, when they came to Ruel, their father, he said, how'd you get back so early today? And they said, an Egyptian delivered us out of the hand of the shepherds. And he also drew the water enough for us, and he watered the flock quite faster than we usually do. And Reuel or Jethro said to his daughters, "Where's he at, and why didn't you bring him to dinner?" Remember, he's a man with 7 daughters, and he's probably thinking, it's about time for me to start marrying some of these girls off and getting some son-in-laws and some grandsons. So he said to his daughter, "Where is he, and why is it that you've left the man? Call him to come and eat bread with us." And Moses was content to dwell with the man. He moved in with him. And Reuel or Jethro gave Moses one of his daughters to marry her. Zipporah was her name. We're going to meet her more over here. They didn't get along too good, but that's Moses' wife here, Zipporah, his daughter. And she bare him a son, and this is Moses' firstborn. His name is Gershom. For he said, names meant something. I've been a stranger in a strange land. And it came to pass in the process of time that the king of Egypt died. And the children of Israel sighed by reason of bondage, and they cried, and their cry came up unto God by reason of the bondage. And then God gets active in these next few verses. Says God heard their groanings. He heard their prayers. God remembered the covenant that he made with Abraham, that he'd one day take them out of there and make a great nation with them. That covenant that he made with Abraham, with Isaac, and with Jacob. God heard, God remembered. Verse 25, God looked upon the children of Israel, and God had respect to them. God acknowledged them. And that's where we'll pick up next week. There, right now, Moses is getting his education, the first 80 years of his life. But God's going to call him to be his number one man here before long. See you next week.